Good evening. Hello and welcome to the first session of this online series, How and Where to Travel in 2022. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. My name's Claire Revin and I'm Head of Travel at the Telegraph. And I'm actually here at the Telegraph tonight, but the only evidence you have of that is this plant. But I can assure you the newsroom's just beyond this room. And yeah, so as we enter the new year, we're buoyed by the loosening of restrictions and the opening up of so many destinations, certainly from the UK's perspective. But there's still a lot of questions surrounding travel. And in this session, we'll be answering all the big questions when it comes to exactly how we should be travelling in 2022. So we're going to be tackling everything from COVID tests and remaining restrictions to the best time to book and everything in between. But without any further ado, let me introduce the first of my Telegraph colleagues to join me this evening, which is Ben Ross, who is Deputy Head of Travel. Hi, Ben.
Hello. What an elegant segue that was.
And also joining Ben and I is Chief Consumer and Culture Editor Nick Trend. Nick's in sunny Norfolk tonight.
Oh, yeah.
Not that sunny.
Some of us are still in the office, Nick.
Yeah, I've talked about being in the office. Ben and I have had to be separated though in different rooms. Feedback, apparently. Anyway, so let's get on with the question in hand, which is how to travel. And as we continue through January's customary booking surge, and I'm delighted to report that this year, finally, there has been one, you'd be forgiven for thinking twice about your booking strategy and exactly what that should be this year. So, kind of balancing the desire to this pent-up demand to get away, popping your champagne cork, just can't wait to get away, but also thinking, well, really, how do I do that? And make sure I do get away and also make sure I safeguard my money. So I guess a sensible place to start would be what the future's looking like. Is the road ahead clear? What do we think? Ben and Nick, how are you feeling about things?
I feel as though there's a sort of the winds have changed, that we are in a position now to start feeling quite a lot more optimistic about travel during 2022. We've certainly been trying to sort of inculcate that spirit into the content that we've been producing at the Telegraph. The rule changes last week, I think, or at the turn of the year were important. I think just to make sure that people are getting that sense of possibility coming online. And although there are huge, Omicron surges in places like France at the moment, there is this sense now that we've discovered that Omicron perhaps doesn't have the same severity as previous variants, that perhaps we can get to a point where we're living with it either both at home and abroad when we travel.
Yeah, I mean, I think we know. I mean, we were being asked similar questions a year ago, and we've been caught out with our predictions before but I think we are much more experienced at understanding the potential setbacks and the way things can go wrong with these sort of predictions. But bearing all that in mind, I agree with Ben. I think we can be pretty optimistic now that we're on the way out of restrictions, and we can look forward with some confidence. We can certainly be traveling now, and we can certainly be booking with due consideration for making sure that we cover our risks for the future without too much of a pandemic shadow over us. So yeah, I'm pretty optimistic.
I think we felt as though that even last time we appeared on this forum that the avenue was opening up, that things were going to get better and better. But it was always with the caveat, unless there is another variant. And then of course the other variant arrived and it put us back a number of weeks. But I think that progression is still there. It's been knocked out by the arrival of the variant, but now we can hopefully get back relatively soon on track. The announcements from the government today about reducing in domestic restrictions, I think, are part of that, pushing us towards a new normal. It's the buzz phrase, isn't it? But I think fairly soon that we can be fairly optimistic that the border issues of travel will certainly lessen, particularly in Europe.
Yeah, I mean, I've been caught out by this today. Going to Switzerland next week, ordered my PCR test this afternoon. Did think I could just have a lat flow test, but I thought, no, I'm going to have a PCR test. 3 minutes later, Switzerland say you no longer need any test. So, you know, we're at the mercy, aren't we, of ever-changing restrictions. So
Well, that's certainly the issue from the point of view of the British traveller. We sort of know exactly what our government is telling us in terms of getting in and out of the UK. But the thing we're always going to have to bear in mind when we're travelling abroad is what the internal restrictions are for that environment. So ski holidays, you're going to Switzerland next week, presumably not. Are you skiing? But even if you are skiing holidays have been one of the big things that we've been talking about recently. The amazing news that France was letting people back in. That's us waiting for France to make a decision, not waiting for the UK to make a decision about travel. The changes that Switzerland have just announced, that's important and absolutely brilliant, and will be a very useful boon for skiers in the coming weeks and months. But again, we're at the mercy of other destinations in terms of how they announce that and when and where they do it. And we can't even hazard a guess as to how these things are going to happen. I do think that the France news in particular last week was absolutely tremendous, and as we all know, we did a huge amount on France holidays as a result in the Telegraph, because it's one of our, it's one of UK travellers' favourite destinations, and just ease things a little bit has been tremendous. The fact that we're only now required to do, we have to caveat almost everything we say today by that fully vaccinated is in brackets in all these answers by the fully vaccinated. Being able to travel with only a lateral flow test before 24 hours is tremendous.
And what do we think about cost, Nick? I mean, I've had just in the past week friends, actually, not even professionally, people ask me about holidays that they'd booked in 2020 that have been rolled forward to this year, and they're experiencing a huge rise in costs. Is that across the board? Is that something we should expect?
I think there's absolutely no doubt that costs will rise. Apart from anything else, travel is very people-centric. The planes are staffed by people, pilots are people, airports are run by people, and people costs are going to go up. So things are going to get expensive, and I think energy costs are going to stay high as well. But there are some. I've been looking at airfares at the moment, and if you're happy to book spontaneously now, you can still get some amazingly good fares on the Eurostar, some short-haul airfares, and because fewer people are traveling, I think hotel rates will stay low for a while. So I think over the next 3, 4, 5 months until the summer, it'll still be, really, it's quite decent prices and bargains out there. But I think that into the summer and beyond, I think there's no doubt we're going to have to be paying more for our travel.
Right.
I was looking at package holidays for families over the weekend, and certainly from that experience, I was feeling as though things were considerably more expensive than they were a couple of years ago, and I think that there's a sort of obvious reason for that.
I mean, car hire costs have gone up 30 or 40%. That's just on that particular element. So, but the good news is I think we'll have a better quality of experience. I don't think sites are going to be so crowded. I think we will be able to experience travel in a less frenetic way. I think airports won't be so busy. There will be some upsides as well, but I think eventually we'll have to pay more for it.
Yeah, and before we go into specific questions very quickly, can we summarise what the most important considerations are for people who want to travel?
Well, I mean, I think I'm just looking at some of the questions. One of the first questions we got was from Tracy asking, should you book a package or book your elements separately? And I think that's, if you want to be safe, if you want your money to be protected, and you want to be looked after if things go wrong, and you want to be able to cancel and get a refund if you have to, and everything to be done all in one go by one company, then you'll definitely be more sensible this year to travel by booking a package with a tour operator. It's not always the case, and we can come on to that later. And the other thing, I don't know if I can find it, somebody else just asked about insurance. Will it cover cancellation?
Yeah.
And it will sometimes cover cancellations and sometimes not. It depends. on the situation. But we do have a very good article which we can share after the session, which will help you choose a decent policy, which will cover the key things you need if you do have to cancel. But no insurance will just cover you if you want to cancel unilaterally. It'll only be in certain situations. So those are the two things.
And does it cover you if the rules change when I'm abroad? Just addressing M's question that was pre-submitted to us.
That's one of the big problems.
If in what respect? If you want to return home early, or if you get stuck out there, or
stuck.
Insurance, it will depend on the policy, but it's usually designed to cover you if you are ill and you fall ill and you're unable to travel back while you're abroad, not just for a straight rule change. Yeah.
I mean,
I think there's one thing I would add in terms of things that people should be thinking about is just to be a little bit more over the rules, but make sure you're keeping in touch with the destination and what those rules are happening over the next month or two before you travel. Don't just book and then just say it's all done and nothing will change. It is possible that the rules in terms of arrival and departure and COVID tests and all the other things may change before you go. So make sure you keep on top of the gov.uk website. We'll look at the Telegraph Travel pages as well, just to make sure that you are up to date on the requirements, because that is one of the things that all the stipulations for package holidays or independent holidays, it is up to you to make sure that you've arrived at the correct arrival requirements from a particular destination. It's not up to the company to do that.
Yeah.
And while that can be incredibly stressful, because I've had to do it and help people do it recently, it seems like a huge mountain you have to climb to fill in all these forms and make sure you get the right kind of tests and make sure you don't fill in the wrong boxes and everything. And you've got all the documentation you need with you when you travel. It's fine. It's worth doing. I don't know anyone who's been traveling recently who hasn't jumped through all those hoops, been quite frustrated about it, but in the end been really glad that they've done it.
Yeah.
Yes, the weird thing is once you're actually on the holiday, it's just a holiday again, isn't it? You do all the work, and that's what I found when I was traveling in the pandemic. It is a fret, and then suddenly you go there and it's like, I remember this. Yeah. This is nice people in a foreign place and lovely food and friendly welcomes, and it's wonderful.
Yeah. And you talked about booking a family holiday, Ben. Your kids are a bit older, but what about those with children aged 12? Do they require a booster jab? Clement pre-submitted this question.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to depend on where you're going. It's local rules for this. And again, I sort of refer to my earlier point that you do need to keep on top of the rules of the particular destination you're going to. We've got lots of stuff online. I don't know if that can be shared, but we've got a decent amount of stuff on traveling with children. There are some destinations have weird complexities, like Austria, for example. It's fine if you're taking kids up to the age of sort of 15, and then this is sort of really complicated bit for 16 and 17-year-olds that do need to be double jabbed in order to function. Quite a lot of 16 and 17-year-olds have not yet been double jabbed. So Austria ski holidays can be a bit tricky for families at the moment. Equally, it's fine if you go to France. You do need to just keep on top of the rules and make sure that the particular age groups of your kids are going to be covered.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to start theming some of these questions. We have got an awful lot on cruise, particularly around how safe it's going to be to go on a cruise. What are our thoughts on that? I guess one of the things that puts people off going on a cruise is, there were some horrendous headlines at the beginning of the pandemic, but of course, it's also been one of the first industries, I guess, to really nail the rules. So where are we at now with that?
Well, I've seen Richard has input on the chat here, saying the USA is advising against cruising. What is your opinion? And certainly, at the turn of the year, they're called the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, I think, advised American travelers to avoid getting on cruises because they felt there was still a high risk there. And we ran I thought, a very good piece by one of our cruise writers called Sarah Macefield, saying this was unfairly pillaring the cruise industry, which is obviously at the very beginning of the pandemic had issues, as you alluded to, in terms of it being a sort of poster child for things going wrong at that time, but also was one of the first of the travel industries to really get its act together and make sure a huge amount of preventative measures were there in terms of sanitation, in terms of COVID passes, in terms of all the useful things that you'd expect for something that is effectively in its own little quarantine bubble at all times. You don't want to introduce disease into that sort of area, and they have been absolutely brilliant at doing this. And I share a little bit of Sarah Mayfield's feeling that this is a slightly unfair action on the part of the US government to bring that about. I mean, it's certainly the case that if members of crew on cruises do test positive, it can get complicated in terms of berthing in some ports, and because the levels that some ports will stop you allowing embarkation on is very small for crews, so that could be complicated. But I suspect, as with all of these things, things are going to ease up. You know, if you're booking a cruise next week, then you might encounter quite a lot of issues in terms of where you're going to be able to go and disembark. But as the year goes on, I think, you know, to the comments we made earlier in this, things will get better and easier.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the problem with cruises is it's one, they visit so many different destinations, so you may come across, you're more likely to have a disruption, as you say, when you go on board. But also, I think the thing to be really aware of is to make sure that you're happy with the preventive measures on board. So how much are you going to have to wear a mask? What's the reality of social distancing rules? What is that going to mean in terms of how you can move around the ships and the activities on board the ships, and also on the kind of shore excursions that you're going to do? You may be absolutely fine with them all, but I think it's something that it's worth thinking about, because you don't want to go onto a ship where you think these restrictions are impinging on my enjoyment. But I think that'll be a temporary thing, as Ben says, because I think they're more likely to ease up. And the other thing is, of course, if the Americans aren't going on cruises, then prices are going to stay down. So, you know, so this could be a good opportunity to enjoy some very good value this year.
They're also very good about flexible changes. I mean, also all the cruise companies have brought in policies that means if things do change, you'll be able to move the booking that you've made if you are concerned about things and you want to move things on. It's again a looking at the small print moment.
Great. Well, Andy, Alice, Marion, Wendy, I hope that answers some of your questions. Let us know if not. Dave as well. So we've got, I mean, obviously, so we've been talking about this a lot, and I mentioned it earlier, this kind of champagne cork moment where everyone's just been so desperate to travel and really want to feel like every trip they make now counts. And, you know, there's lots of talk of trips of a lifetime. Now, of course, some of those trips, Gary's asked us a question here about one that he had booked pre-pandemic that's been rescheduled. And his holiday's been rescheduled several times, and he's worried that hotels and safari companies won't honour his booking with the travel company indefinitely. So what would you suggest with people in that situation where you know, they're kind of looking at rolling rebookings and exhausting?
Yeah, well, that particular question which you've referenced, that the viewers can't see it, but this is a huge safari, a lovely sounding safari which Gary had booked with an operator based in Cape Town, and his problem there is that his arrangements and his money are not protected by UK law, so he is in a slightly difficult position there. He just has to negotiate as best he can. But I think you're right, Claire. I think a lot of people have had holidays rolled over. They've decided not to cancel. They've decided to help tour operator out by leaving their money on credit with those tour operators. I think it's quite a complicated situation, especially if prices go up. But your money at least is protected, and if you want to insist on a refund, I think you'll be entitled in most cases to do that. So I think it's just a question of always talking to people, talking to the tour operators, seeing if you can find a solution, and that's the best way forward at the moment. It's going to be, I think it's going to become more and more of an issue as time runs out and people realise they're not maybe going to get the original holiday they booked, no matter how long they wait. But the great solution is to have a dialogue, perhaps change your destination if you want to, change the duration, but see if you can come to a civilized arrangement with the tour operator.
Yeah. So we've been one of the big areas that a lot of you want to know about as well is ski, of course. Now we've covered that in a huge amount of detail over the past few weeks. As always, Telegraph readers love their ski holidays, and with particular focus on Europe with all the changing restrictions. But we've had one question about ski in the US and what the kind of situation is there. And I guess that for those people looking for slightly later season ski, that does extend the season somewhat. What is the situation with skiing in the US?
The rules for getting to the US are that fully vaccinated British travellers who are adults, who are over the age of 18, can go to the US. We're back to this again. Anyone who's unvaccinated cannot, and you can't use proof of recovery either. You have to be fully vaccinated for that. And then children under 18 are exempt from vaccinations. So that's good, I guess. But the weird thing is that when you're in the US, vaccination rules in ski resorts vary from resort to resort. So they depend on local public health policy in that resorts. So Vale Resorts, for example, requires proof of vaccination for everyone on the mountain, but doesn't require you to do it on ski lifts. It just moves around from state to state.
Yeah. And today, one of the big travel stories of the day was the introduction of 5G and the effect that that's had on flights. And so I've noticed a few questions in our chat asking, is flying safe? Well, I mean, I think the fact that flights are being cancelled shows that safety is paramount there with those flight operators. What do we know about this situation in terms of, I think the safety questions are not just about the 5G, but also about masks. So let's just focus on 5G for a moment. What do we know about that situation and what that's likely to mean for us as passengers and disruption we're likely to face?
Well, I think the issue with 5G, and it's particularly an issue mainly affecting America at the moment, is that in the local area around an airport, it can interfere with the altimeters on a plane, and that has an issue in poor visibility, because it means that they can't rely on their instruments in the same way that they can when the 5G isn't interfering. So they may not be able to land in lower visibility, which will cause backlogs and diversions and cancellations. But I think the latest I heard this morning was that there is a suspension of the use of 5G in America. They're intending to suspend that around American airports. So I think it will be sorted out. And the point is not that it'll affect safety, but that for safety reasons, planes will have to be diverted or cancelled if 5G is in operation around airports. So I think, to be honest, I think it's one of those things which is just bound to be sorted. As to whether you're more vulnerable to catch COVID on a flight, I don't think anyone even knows that yet. You're probably just as vulnerable in a tube train, a long tube journey, as you are on a flight, but especially if it's crowded. But I don't think we know the answer to that.
No.
Obviously, we're all experts in mobile communications on the travel desk and know exactly how 5G works. But it's certainly what I understand is that the 5G is also being done on a different frequency in America than it is from Europe, and therefore in Europe it's all groovy and nice, and in America it's very complicated and difficult.
And what about masks on planes? I mean, we've speculated about whether we'll soon be able to fly without them, or whether indeed one would want to fly without them.
Well, I thought we had tremendous, interesting news, didn't we, today, that masks are going to be removed from public transport in the UK on the 26th of Jan. We're going to get back to pre-Omicron times from that point of view, and planes are a form of transport, and I certainly hope at some point we'll be able to go on on planes without wearing masks, because a long haul flight with a mask is not a particularly pleasant thing to do. Presumably, Nick, this is regulated by wherever the flag carrier is based, whether you're doing it rather than being a general thing.
Yeah, I was about to say, I mean, presumably, if it were to be implemented according to national law, then you might be able to take your mask off halfway through your flight, or
no,
presumably Christy asked that. Where is mask free at the moment?
For aeroplanes.
No. In destination, I was saying, well, it depends on the destination you're going to as to whether you could take them off in the flight. But where is mask free at the moment? That's a question from Chrissy.
Well, I think we published a piece on this today, didn't we?
We did, yes. Testing whether you've read it.
30-something destinations around the world where mask wearing is completely is not compulsory, but they're not always the most attractive. I think Somalia, Syria, I think Sweden might be one, so sort of Eritrea, maybe Ethiopia. They're not the number one holiday destinations, although Ethiopia is very interesting, obviously. But yeah, there aren't many places. But I think that's going to change very rapidly.
Yeah. Now, we talked about booking strategies, and one that we saw employed across the board of Telegraph readers last year, savvy Telegraph readers, or desperate to travel Telegraph readers as well, was the backup booking situation. So one would book a foreign holiday, but also have a domestic holiday booked just in case the foreign one didn't come off, or vice versa, of course. Now, what do we think about? Is that a good idea going forward? Is that something that we should, assuming we can afford the deposit, that we should be doing, or do we need to be a little bit more targeted in our holiday bookings this year?
Ben, that's an ethical issue. I think
it's an ethical issue. Yes, I was going to say it seems. I mean, one of the downsides of people doing that, of course, is that if you have two holidays booked, one operator is going to lose out, your customer, and that's always been something I think we've been quite reluctant to necessarily advocate too consistently as a process. I mean, if you're able to get a refund on your booking and you have two bookings, then there's nothing against you booking two things. I just wonder whether this year there may be less reason to it. I mean, it's great. I mean, if people have the opportunity to book a foreign holiday and they're confident of going, and they want also to have a UK holiday, I would be advocating having different weeks booked at this point and making sure that you can have both, because we're in an optimistic mode and an optimistic frame of mind.
But I think in the UK you are probably going to lose money. So if you've booked a cost,
yes, there aren't going to be any. Yeah.
You will almost certainly lose your deposit on that.
If you feel glamorous and rich enough to not mind about losing a deposit, then I suppose that's fair enough. I would resent it bitterly.
Well, of course, you have to think about the operators that will lose out from that as well.
Exactly.
So there's lots of talk about the Caribbean. Of course, that's another favourite destination for all of us, I could say. So what are the travel PCR quarantine restrictions for the Caribbean? Several people have asked this. Well, I think I can answer that in that, you know, each island in the way that every other country has different rules do differ. So yeah, as we've said throughout this, you need to be really on top of checking the foreign travel advice for each destination, looking to see when you book which suits you and what the rules are, and just making sure you keep abreast of that. So
nice new direct flights out to Tobago at the end of the month from Virgin as well. I quite fancy Tobago.
Yeah. Kay's asked, have they now abolished locator forms?
For the UK?
Not for the UK yet, no. We haven't. They haven't abolished day 2 tests yet, have they? So you need to show that you've booked that, and you need to show also that you're vaccinated. So I think and if you're not vaccinated, where you're going to be in quarantine. So I think PLFs, passenger location forms, will be here for a few weeks more at least, as long as those restrictions remain in place.
Ben, funnily enough, you mentioned Tobago. Andrew's asked a question about Tobago. And this is something that has faced a lot of people on the travel desk indeed, and we've had lots of questions from readers over the last few weeks about this. Andrew had COVID at Christmas and has a digital recovery passport. However, in Tobago's last update in July 2021, it had no mention of a recovery passport, probably because they didn't necessarily widely exist at that point. Instead, they insist on a PCR, but of course, if you've had COVID within 12 weeks of taking PCR, you risk testing positive. So is there, how would you go about that if you were Andrew?
It's something that occupied my thoughts quite a lot. I was traveling to France at the end of last year, and the PCR testing requirement came in for day 2 on the way back, and I was very fretful about this because I'd had COVID about 6 weeks before. You can get a generated digital COVID recovery certificate from your NHS app, but if Tobago aren't recognising it, then you're right. The thing that's drilled into you when you have when you get COVID and everyone's phoning you and to making sure you haven't left your house, and it's all very exciting, or certainly when I had it, is that they say you must not have another PCR test or another lateral flow for the next 12 weeks because it may emerge positive. From my point of view, I sort of took the risk and went to France and didn't come positive. I'm not sure of the numbers in terms of what percentage of people are likely to show a positive result after a period of time, I'm afraid.
Here's an interesting one. It's a non-COVID question about travel strategies. And our old friend, the UK passport expiry date. Now, we have been highlighting this since before January last year, way before, as a change that came in post-Brexit. And we have seen it catch out, even though we have written and updated our features on this many times. A phenomenal number of people at the Telegraph even have been caught out by this. So, Nick, as our resident expert, do you want to talk everyone through this just to remind them? PS has mentioned this and said we have highlighted this and saved him getting caught out by it. But do you want to just warn everyone about what they need to do?
About passport validity?
Duration.
So, when passports traditionally have been renewed, UK passports have been renewed, if you've renewed your passport before your old one, a few months before your old one expires, which most of us do, what they've tended to do here is to add on those remaining 5 or 6 months, let's say, on your old passport onto the validity of the new one. So your new passport might be valid for 10 years, 5 months, but the EU will only allow you in if your passport until 9 years and 9 months after the issue of your passport. So 3 months before the 10-year period expires, not 3 months before any longer validity. Have I explained that right? So if your passport is valid for 10 years and 6 months, you might think that you're allowed into the EU right up until 3 months before it expires. But actually you're not. You're only allowed into the EU 9 years and 9 months after it was issued. And that's just caught a lot of people out because the EU thinks a passport is valid for 10 years, perfectly reasonably. We think a passport might be valid for slightly longer. And that's just caused a lot of confusion. And it's one of those bizarre technicalities of Brexit, which I'm afraid has caught quite a few people out. We've had readers who've had to return back from the airport because they're not entitled to enter the EU because their passport no longer has validity as far as the EU is concerned. So just double check and get your passport renewed sooner rather than later. That's my advice.
That was amazing. That got less and less clear as the public said. Only joking. It was brilliant.
No. It is hard to explain. Does it make the harder it gets?
Exactly. It hurts.
But just look at the issue date of your passport, not at the expiry date, and think 9 years and 9 months after the issue date, and then you'll be all right. Forget about the 10-year thing.
So still on Europe, SS has asked, if we had boosters in September, will we be okay for the pass sanitaire in France in June? So that's September, October, November, December, January.
I don't think there are any. I think once you've had your booster, no one's requiring a fourth jab yet, so you should be fine. Yes, Nick?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've got a pass sanitaire, and it only recognises that booster, which I think has to be done within 6 months of your second jab. But I don't think anywhere except for Israel and perhaps UE is offering a fourth jab. That's not to say that it won't happen, but as things stand, we don't know what the timings or requirements will be on that.
Yeah. So Shay's just asked a question about Brazil, and I feel like I've seen another question on Brazil in our pre-submitted ones. Yes, there we are. We were thinking of going to South America, but are concerned that the tourist situations in some South American countries may have deteriorated as a result of the pandemic, Brazil in particular. We don't really want a headache. Should we avoid for safer options, e.g. the Caribbean and Europe, or would you still recommend? I mean, again, is that a tour operator question? Are we?
I think it's a good question to ask the person that you want to book the holiday through. That the places that you'll be going to will be things that are confident and happy for tourists to be there. I'd be surprised if there are many operators who are working in Brazil who weren't fairly confident about the offer that they were giving for the particular destination you were going to. It's worth getting. I mean, that's what a great tour operator should be able to do. They should be offering you specific advice about the holiday that they're offering, and whether they feel it's the infrastructure and the things you're after are going to be there.
Now here's one. That affects lots of people who like to travel independently, so book flights and then kind of book, the bits in between themselves. So sometimes feels a bit more of an adventure, I think. Now Karen's saying to reduce the risk this time around, she's thinking of booking a package. However, our family annual travel insurance will not cover us if one of us gets a positive result and can't fly. And so this is still the main financial risk. Now, isn't that where the amazing flexibility currently offered by many tour operators comes in? Or should they just simply shop around for different insurance? I think that's one for you, Nick.
Well, I mean, a good insurance policy would cover your cancellation costs if one of your party has a positive COVID test. But it's not. Airlines have been just as flexible as tour operators, so you wouldn't have a problem, I don't think, in postponing your flight or changing it to a later date. You wouldn't be able to get a refund in those circumstances. I don't think a tour operator would offer you a refund either. Your problem if you booked independently will be your accommodation.
Yeah.
So I actually think it's fine to book independently, and I think you can have more fun doing it that way. You book a flight or a Eurostar and then you arrange your accommodation. But you do need to make sure you're on top of the small print when it comes to cancelling your hotel or rearranging your villa. Hotels are often more straightforward. You can go through an agency like booking.com, which will allow you a late cancellation. Something like a villa is much trickier. I had a letter from a reader who'd booked, presumably they couldn't go in the end, they booked a £2,000 villa in France over Christmas, and they were worried they wanted to find some insurance which would cover them if restrictions were imposed on travel to France, and no insurer is going to cover you for that. The premium would be incredibly expensive. So if you book your accommodation independently, that's the tricky point, I think.
Yeah.
But also, just going back to that question on Brazil and whether we should worry about the local situation with COVID, I think what often isn't mentioned and what is important about going to a further away destination or a more exotic or a developing country, I know Brazil is quite a developed country, but there are developing countries out there too, is what happens if you catch COVID? Are you happy that the local health service is going to be up to caring for you? And if you're in a vulnerable category, I think that is something to consider about your destination. Know that the health service in Brazil at the height of the pandemic a few months ago was totally overwhelmed, for example. So I don't think it's so much about the day-to-day tourist infrastructure. It's the risks as to what happens when you get ill, and you just might want to consider that in terms of your own aversion to risk, how far away from your home you're going, and how vulnerable you feel from a health point.
I'm just going to jump in. Des has said that will I return to pre-submitted questions before the end of the session? And I'm the only question I can see that might be yours, Des, is one about a caravan, taking your caravan to Spain May, July. What food and drink can you take in? Well, I mean, there's some really specific rules there, aren't there, around meat and meat products and dairy and so on. I'm just going to read that out actually, because you're not allowed to take meat or meat products from the UK to the EU apart from fish or fish products up to a maximum of 20 kilograms. You're not allowed to take milk, cheese, yogurt or other milk-based products, except for infant food or pet food. But you are allowed to take eggs if avian flu restrictions allow egg products and honey into the country. No to citrus fruits, but yes to bananas, coconuts, pineapples and dates. And other than that, you should avoid other plant-based products, including fresh or frozen fruits and vegetables, including ginger.
And as Louise points out, there are shops in Spain.
Yeah.
Yes.
There are shops in Spain.
And the food will probably
with
be
much
cheaper
cheaper
and a little bit
booze,
better.
we also point out.
Yeah.
Don't bring your own. So I hope that helps. Now, Australia and New Zealand. Borders are rumoured, says Valerie, to be opening in, they are unsubstantiated rumours, in February in Western Australia and New Zealand. So, I mean, it's such a massive destination, isn't it, for so many of our readers, either as a favourite holiday destination and, you know, both of them, wow, what huge scope they offer, but also family, friends and so on await and, you know, haven't been seen for over 2 years, some of them. So what would be our advice to people wanting to travel there?
I was speaking to the Australian Tourist Board a couple of days ago, and they were very clear that there is no specific announcement they're making yet about when borders are opening. I think one of the good things about Australia and New Zealand is that for most of us, we plan a holiday to those destinations because they are so far away. We plan them quite a long way in advance. So, you know, any advice we give about Australia and New Zealand is never really going to be about, can I pop over there next week? I mean, there would be a strong hope, I would have thought, that things will be back to normal within 6 months in those two destinations. And they're moving their COVID policies around. But I don't think I would be jumping at booking absolutely now. I mean, it'd be nice to know at least a bit of a direction of travel from both Australia and New Zealand. I don't know what Nick thinks.
Well, I was just going to say the point about Western Australia reopening, I think that's just for internal travel. I think they've got a date in February when they're going to start allowing Australians to cross the country. I think I've got a feeling that New Zealand is hoping to open around the end of February. It's gone out of my mind exactly, but I think you're absolutely right, Ben. There's also going to be a huge amount of pressure on flights because so many people are going to want to go back there, and there aren't so many seats down to the Antipodes. So I would be thinking about booking in the autumn for the Australia, New Zealand spring and summer.
We are going to have to finish there, I'm afraid. Anything did you want to quickly say, Ben?
I just wanted to say Australia and New Zealand are amazing destinations. You should definitely book a holiday as soon as you possibly can, but find out when it's open first, because what a sublime holiday that would be. I
would just like, I'm really sorry, we're going to have to stop there. But thank you, Ben. Thank you, Nick, for joining me. And thank you so much for all of you for tuning in and joining us this evening.